September 1912. Adolf Hitler is homeless, wandering the streets of Vienna, a failed artist. World War I hasn't even begun. Just 25 years later, he would become the most powerful man in the Eastern Hemisphere, Führer of the German Reich, gracing full control of mainland Europe. From his joining of the original German Workers' Party to his final days in suicide beneath the Reich Chancellery, this video will focus on Adolf Hitler's life, strolling through a myriad of different topics via Iceberg format, beginning relatively common and sinking lower and lower into more obscure stories and facts. Adolf Hitler always had an affinity for art. Beginning as a teenager in Austria, he was rejected twice in applying to the prestigious Vienna Art School. First in 1907, after passing the initial portfolio review, he failed the secondary figure drawing, with the examiners noting his weakness in drawing people. In 1908, he was once again rejected and told to pursue a career in architecture. Hitler lived in Vienna primarily until 1913, staying mainly in men's hostels, selling watercolor paintings to tourists. Hitler, later in life, reflecting on the Vienna rejections, compartmentalized the situation, saying it proved his calling was politics, not artistry. His original art later influenced his political ambitions, growing a love for neoclassical architecture and developing a disdain for what he called modern art, considered abstract and degenerate. The swastika symbol originated over 5,000 years ago across ancient civilizations, most famously used in Hindu. The symbol was originally meant as a way to invoke luck or protection, being viewed as a positive. In the 1800s, the swastika saw a revival in Europe, being linked to ancient European cultures. As a byproduct, this led Hitler to view the symbol in the early 1900s during his rise as a political figure. In 1920, Hitler designed the Nazi flag. This flag design included a red background with a white circle and a black swastika, explaining the symbol for the struggle of the Aryan race. The visual of the swastika was extremely effective and virtually on every Nazi government building countless times. The symbol was simple but strong. The Nazis, in most cases, including their official symbol, opted to tilt the swastika 45 degrees, magnifying its sharpness, invoking more aggressive imagery. The simplicity yet sharpness of the symbol enabled for immediate Nazi recognition, making the swastika heavily marketable. After World War II, the swastika was banned in Germany and heavily discouraged throughout much of the world, although the symbol's origins were of ancient peace and religion. After Adolf Hitler took leadership of Nazi Germany, he became more central in building planning. Taking original experience as an artist, even without schooling, Hitler considered himself in some ways an architect. This is proven by the close relationship he had with Albert Speer, the lead architect of the Third Reich. Speer, in reflecting on the Fuhrer, said that Hitler had strong instincts for scale and symbolism, but criticized his ability to understand logistics and engineering realities. Hitler's architecture style can be best viewed in the model plans of Germania, the total reconstruction of the German capital, Berlin. These plans included a completely rebuilt northwest axis culminating at two endpoints, one of those endpoints being the Volkshall, an enormous government building with the world's biggest dome. Other titanic works include the Deutsches Stadion, which would have been the world's largest stadium, located within the Nuremberg rally grounds. Hitler's obsession with architecture became a burden during World War II as large amounts of resources were allocated towards the completion of buildings. Some buildings within Nazi Germany hadn't fully stopped construction until 1943, 4 years after World War II had begun. Hitler's early life and passion for art translated into a later love of architecture. The Beer Hall Putsch was Adolf Hitler's first attempt to seize power within Germany. This came in 1923, many years before he would officially be granted it. Germany, at the time, was in a state of upheaval, facing runaway hyperinflation and still entrenched in the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles after the loss of World War I. Adolf Hitler had his sights set on Bavaria. The city had recently become a right-wing hotbed. The plan was to initially seize the city and then march into Berlin, where the NSDAP would overthrow the Weimar Republic. The putsch hinged on support from three very important men within Bavaria. This support was initially forced at gunpoint. However, the takeover attempt failed when the men renounced their support the day after the putsch began. 16 Nazis and 4 police officers were killed during this event. Curiously enough, there are no actual documented photos of Hitler during it, even though he started the putsch himself, storming into a Bavarian beer hall, declaring a national revolution. Hitler was jailed for this political revolt, charged with high treason, and sentenced 5 years in comfortable prison conditions at Landsberg. Considered a light sentence for such a crime due to kind judges, he would be released in 9 months. This event, even with Hitler's imprisonment, gave him national recognition, allowing for the continuation of the National Socialist German Workers' Party even after the failure. In 1933, Adolf Hitler had just become Chancellor of Germany, but he had not yet fully consolidated power within its government. On February 27th, the famous German government building, the Reichstag, caught fire, burning at night and causing extensive damage. Firefighters reportedly found young communist Marinus van der Lubbe, who was arrested immediately, later confessing to starting the fire. Hitler, who was eating dinner at the time, immediately moved to condemn the attack within hours of the fire starting, calling it the opening act of a communist revolution. The next day, Paul von Hindenburg would sign the infamous Reichstag fire decree at the behest of Hitler, suppressing free speech along with various other forms of freedoms. The restrictions were originally framed as temporary, however they were never really lifted. This fire gave Hitler the political ammunition to arrest thousands of communists and political adversaries. This happened right before the March 1933 elections, in which the Nazis won minority rule, eventually leading to the Enabling Act, giving Hitler full dictatorial control inside of Germany. Operation Sea Lion was a proposed military campaign that never came to fruition. The details called for an invasion of Great Britain in 1940. After large military successes in Western Europe, Great Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, fully isolated. The operation was to begin with the Nazis establishing beachheads on Britain's southern coast, using some 160,000 troops to advance to London, forcing the British to surrender. Hitler, in control of the final strategic decision, said during the planning stages the operation would only commence if Germany achieved air superiority over Britain. This planning stage led to the Battle of Berlin, an air battle fought with the German Luftwaffe. Germany never achieved air superiority, causing the operation to be put on hold indefinitely. A big issue for the Germans in a possible invasion was the naval advantage Great Britain had in defending the island by way of the English Channel against the Germans. By 1941, Germany had shifted focus to the Eastern Front, leaving Britain isolated in the West, and for all intents and purposes, abandoning Operation Sea Lion. In the summer of 1944, a Nazi collapse was inevitable. However, Hitler rejected the idea of outright surrender, believing in principled determinism. This was not reciprocated throughout the internal ranks of the Nazi government, as a plan was derived internally to assassinate Hitler at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's main eastern headquarters. Operation Valkyrie, interestingly enough, was originally a legitimate emergency plan approved by Hitler himself. The reason for such plan was to maintain order inside of Germany and suppress possible uprisings. However, a senior group of military officers conspired, turning the operation on its head. The plan, which was executed on July 20th, 1944, was to assassinate Hitler, seizing control of Berlin and negotiating with the Allies to save the country from total destruction. This plan failed, as only one of the two bombs that were planted inside of a suitcase went off in the meeting room that Hitler was in. The room, which in this case was a wooden hut, was immediately destroyed. However, much of the bomb was able to escape the room due to the weakness of the wood. This, in part, enabled Hitler to survive. 4 men died, and Hitler, due to the blast, suffered hearing damage. The failed assassination led to 7,000 internal arrests and around 5,000 executions. Believe it or not, the same day of the assassination failure, Hitler met with Mussolini, who both explored the debris from the bomb. On December 11th, 1941, Adolf Hitler preemptively declared war on the United States following Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor. This occurred at a time when the United States and Germany were already in a de facto state of conflict in the Atlantic Ocean. The United States was funneling billions of dollars to the Allies through the Lend-Lease Act. Although Germany had a binding military pact with Japan, it was not required under the agreement to declare war on the United States in this specific scenario. However, Hitler chose to do so anyway, believing that war with the United States had already begun through naval engagements. He also believed the United States was societally weak, viewing its racially mixed population as a liability. The declaration briefly aided German U-boat operations, as the United States was unprepared for modern submarine warfare. However, it also allowed the United States to fully mobilize into a wartime economy, rapidly expanding its industrial manufacturing capacity. This decision has been since criticized, as American public opinion had previously been divided over entering a broader conflict with Germany. The declaration by Hitler instead galvanized domestic unity within the United States, strengthening U.S. support for armament production, enabling the war machine to produce for both the Soviet Union and the Western European allies in their fight against Germany. 271,000 is a number sometimes referenced in discussions about the Holocaust, specifically stemming from an alleged report associated with the Red Cross that is often misrepresented as a total number of people that died within the concentration camps. In reality, this figure was never intended to represent total Holocaust deaths and comes from records connected to the International Tracing Service, which compiled death certificates for some prisoners from a limited number of Nazi concentration camps. These certificates were based on partial Nazi documentation that survived the war and were later received by the German Red Cross and the International Committee of the Red Cross. The figures are therefore severely incomplete, as they do not include deaths from all concentration camps, excluding several pure extermination camps. They omit mass killings carried out without documentation. Due to the scale of the extermination, especially towards the end of the war, many deaths were never formally recorded, and countless records were destroyed by the Nazis, making the 271,000 figure a misrepresentation. Adolf Hitler had a complicated relationship with religion. He grew up Roman Catholic and rebelled against strict Catholic teachings in his early years. but as an adult, he did not regularly practice the faith and largely abandoned attendance at church services after leaving home. Throughout his political career, Hitler often publicly proclaimed himself a Christian, and the Nazi Party even included positive Christianity in its platform, but historians characterize this as opportunistic political rhetoric rather than sincere belief designed to maintain support amongst Germany's overwhelmingly Christian populace. Many senior Nazi officials later reported that Hitler privately viewed organized Christianity as weak, corrupt, and incompatible with Nazi ideology, and he only tolerated it so long as it didn't interfere with his overarching goals. Privately, Hitler's language about province and destiny suggests a vague belief in a higher guiding force, a view some scholars describe as closer to a deist or mystical providential thinking than Orthodox Christian doctrine, particularly as he interpreted events like his survival of assassination attempts as evidence of a divine mission. During the early stages of World War II, Adolf Hitler made a rather famous visit to the Nazi-occupied Paris, France. This visit commenced on June 22, 1940, after Paris, declared an open city, was spared from any heavy fighting. This visit took place right at dawn and was concealed from the public, deemed a strictly private excursion for Hitler's personal protection. Accompanied by his architect Albert Speer, Hitler toured historic sites in Paris, such as the Eiffel Tower and the Triumphal Victory Arch. The visit to Paris was deeply emotional for Hitler himself, as he had always dreamed of visiting a city as a young, impoverished Australian. He reportedly took architectural inspiration from the city's design. The visit lasted around 3 hours in total, with Hitler never returning to Paris for the remainder of his life. The Rhineland, an extremely important industrial region in western Germany, was forced to be demilitarized as a result of the Treaty of Versailles following Germany's surrender. The Rhineland's location next to the Rhine River was deemed Germany's best natural western defense barrier. The demilitarization was a critical blow to a politically unstable post-World War I Germany and was viewed by many as a national humiliation. Hitler regarded the region as inherently German soil, arguing in his book Mein Kampf that Germany could never be secure without it. On March 7, 1936, roughly 3 years after coming to power, Adolf Hitler ordered 30,000 lightly armed German troops into the Rhineland region. At this stage, it was considered a major calculated gamble by Nazi Germany, and Hitler recalled this period as being one of the most nerve-wracking times of his life. The troops were ordered to immediately withdraw if France responded militarily. They did not. This action allowed the Rhineland to be swiftly remilitarized, earning Hitler immediate popular support from the German people, a calculated risk deemed successful due to the inaction of Britain and France. The 1936 German election, known more of as a referendum, was a single-question ballot asking whether or not German citizens approved of Hitler's current leadership. This election, if you can even call it that, happened in the aftermath of the remilitarization of the Rhineland. The referendum received 98.8% approval, all votes counted by the Nazi Party. There was no serious opposition on the ballot to such referendum, and famously, the ballot structure was done in a way to put high emphasis on approving of Hitler's government. From a historical perspective, it should be noted, Hitler did have a very high approval in Germany during this period, regardless of the legitimacy of this referendum. There was reportedly overwhelming high turnout, which was done as a way to propagandize the regime, signaling the German citizens' full-scale support of the Nazi dictatorship. The Enabling Act of 1933 eliminated any chance of legitimate democratic elections under Hitler. The Ural mountain ranges were viewed as an extremely important strategical area by Adolf Hitler. These mountains mark the geographical boundary between Europe and Asia. Theorized under Operation Barbarossa, Hitler and other German generals' plans were to take over land west of the Ural Mountains. This was more widely explained as part of Hitler's Lebensraum Plan, or General Plan Ost. As World War II progressed, the Soviets relocated many factories to the Urals in an effort to keep mainline production away from the war. The Nazis never reached the Urals during World War II, which kept the industrial region safe and producing. In the end, the mountains represented a geographical footprint that was unattainable due to the war, leaving the Nazis' relationship with the region forever hypothetical. Führerprinzip, which is German for leader principle, was a core organizational doctrine of Nazi Germany. This ideological principle said that nobody was above the Führer, and that Hitler's decisions superseded judicial authority. The doctrine preached that leadership was pyramidal, following downward from Hitler, who was the ultimate apex. This enabled Hitler the ability to command every governmental facet, forcing institutions, businesses, schools, and organizations to appoint a leader that was acceptable to him. This enabled for more wide-scale control of the country from a myriad of industries. The doctrine helped eliminate democratic governance, creating a cult of personality leadership style, allowing for the complete authority to be centered around the Führer. On the night before the D-Day landings, Adolf Hitler was at his Bavarian residence. He reportedly had given do not disturb orders and stayed up till around 2 a.m. watching films. The next morning, when the Allied invasion had officially began, Hitler did not awake immediately, possibly sleeping until late morning or perhaps around noon. This type of sleep schedule was not unusual for Hitler at all, especially during the war, staying up till the early morning and then sleeping in, with his subordinates often reluctant in waking him. German intelligence was initially confused by the landing spot of Normandy, as they expected the Allied invasion elsewhere. This caused many people within Germany to think the Normandy invasion was just a diversion. The truth is that Hitler sleeping in on the morning of the Normandy invasion did likely delay German units, as power was heavily centralized. Many German divisions were waiting on orders from the Führer himself. However, it likely wouldn't have changed the overall war situation. As German defenses were outnumbered, they also lost air superiority. In 1938, Adolf Hitler commissioned his lead architect Albert Speer to construct the new Reich Chancellery. This project was completed at an astonishing pace, taking roughly 1 year, with laborers working around the clock. Floodlights were installed to allow work to continue through the night. The building's architecture can be classified as monumental neoclassicalism. Hitler's personal office alone measured over 3,800 square feet. High ceilings and marble floors were deliberately used to project power and authority, with the intent of intimidating and humbling foreign diplomats. Ironically, the building was rarely used, as World War II began shortly after its completion. The structure suffered heavy damage during Allied bombing raids in 1944, and was largely destroyed by the time Soviet troops entered Berlin in May of 1945. Hitler spent his final months beneath the building, not inside it. He found the ruins of Berlin deeply depressing and avoided being above ground, largely due to a lack of trust in surface buildings amid constant Allied bombardment. Germany initially joined a formal alliance with Italy through the Pact of Steel in 1939, linking the two nations as supposed equal partners. However, as World War II progressed, it became increasingly clear that the relationship was heavily one-sided. In 1940, Italy invaded Greece without notifying Germany. Poor logistical planning and weak troop performance led to a failed campaign, with Italian forces being pushed back to Albania. This forced Germany to divert resources to secure its southern flank. Most notably, in 1941, Germany delayed Operation Barbarossa in order to assist Italy by invading Yugoslavia. Although the German army achieved a swift victory, the subsequent occupation was largely handled by Italian forces and was widely regarded as logistically inefficient. By 1942, senior German commanders openly stated that Italian military units could not be relied upon. Italy's surrender to the Allies in September of 1943 compelled Germany to secure control of occupation zones in southern Europe, further straining its resources. Adolf Hitler firmly believed in biological struggle between races and social groups. He placed Aryans, specifically Nordic Germans, at the top of this racial hierarchy, viewing them as the primary creators of culture. Other Western European groups were conditionally accepted, including Scandinavians, some Dutch, and some British. Below them were Southern Europeans, such as Italians and Greeks. Slavs then followed, whom Hitler believed were incapable of self-governance and therefore subhuman. At the very bottom were Jews, whom Hitler blamed for the moral and societal collapse of nations. He accused them of orchestrating economic systems such as both capitalism and communism. This racial hierarchy strongly influenced Hitler's political ambitions, ideology, long-term goals, and was used to justify persecution and violence as necessary measures for German survival. It is true that Hitler was named Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1938. This designation is awarded to an individual who most influenced global events, and Hitler received it largely due to the annexation and reunification of Austria with the Greater German Reich. Another notable event in 1938 was the Munich Agreement, which forced British and France to concede the Sudetenland. From a geopolitical perspective, Hitler was skillfully outmaneuvering Europe's major powers at the time. The tone of the Time magazine piece was not one of praise, but rather recognition of Hitler's significance on the world stage. Many protested Hitler appearing on the cover, to which Time responded that the title reflects influence, not approval. Joseph Stalin also appeared on the cover twice. The actual cover itself is visually shocking. It depicts Hitler with his back to the viewer in a seated position, playing what looks to be a pipe organ, the pipes doubling as a torture device with victims' bodies hanging from a spinning wheel, a visual similarity to the gymnasium in Outlast Whistleblower. Much has been made of Nazi activity in Antarctica, though the extent of their involvement is often exaggerated. A single expedition was planned and completed shortly before World War II. The primary motivation was territorial claims, as several nations were asserting sovereignty over parts of the continent at the time. Germany also explored the potential for resource extraction, particularly whale oil, and conducted aerial mapping. Swastika-marked darts were dropped to mark surveyed areas. In reality, Antarctica offered little strategic or economic value due to its extreme climate. The persistent myths surrounding underground Nazi bases are impractical when considering the immense cost versus minimal gain in developing such fortresses. After the 1938-39 expedition, the Nazis never returned. Their focus shifted entirely to World War II. The Nazis held many of their ceremonial marches and rallies at the Zeppelin Field, located within the Nuremberg rally grounds, completed in the mid-1930s. However, an even larger rally complex was planned to the south. The Marsfeld, meaning March Field, was intended to be a massive parade ground with the capacity of up to 500,000 people, dwarfing Zeppelin Field. Construction began in 1938, starting with the towers flanking the center field, but was halted by the outbreak of World War II. Of the planned 24 stone towers, only 11 were partially complete, leaving the field unfinished. No major rallies were ever held there, and the project was ultimately abandoned. The planned scale was so vast that the Nazis intended to stage mock military battles for spectator entertainment. After the war, the partially completed towers were demolished to make way for housing developments. MIFO bills were essential financial instruments issued through a dummy company used by the Nazi regime to enable rapid rearmament during the 1930s while concealing massive military expenditures. The shell company responsible for issuing the bills was created in 1934. German arm manufacturers accepted the MIFO bills at a 4% interest rate, with maturity set at 5 years and guaranteed by the German state. Critically, these bills did not appear in the official government budget. In simple terms, they allowed Germany to rearm quickly without alarming the public or foreign powers. By the mid-1930s, over 12 million Reichsmarks had been tied up in MIFA bills. When the bills were set to mature in 1939, the German economy faced serious strain. The economist who originally designed the system, who was not a Nazi, warned Hitler of the danger. Hitler responded by removing him from his position and delaying payments to arms manufacturers. Some payments were eventually made, largely through plunder of occupied territories. The system also contributed to significant reduction in unemployment as heavy investment was directed towards infrastructure and monumental architecture. Adolf Hitler committed suicide on April 30th, 1945 in the Fuhrer bunker by shooting himself in the right temple while simultaneously biting down on a cyanide capsule. This dual method was used due to Hitler's extreme paranoia, specifically regarding his lack of trust in the capsule's effectiveness. The cyanide capsules issued by the Nazis contained liquid poison, which would force a delayed effect as digestion takes place. Hitler would likely have died from either method alone. Reports indicate the room smelled of burnt almonds, a scent commonly associated with cyanide poisoning. The Wannsee Conference took place in Wannsee, Germany, a suburb of Berlin. This meeting was held in January 1942, and its primary purpose was logistical coordination. The conference, formally dubbed the Final Solution to the Jewish Question, clarified the definition of who was considered Jewish and organized the systematic deportation and extermination of Jews in Eastern Europe, particularly in present-day Poland. Adolf Hitler himself did not attend the meeting. However, 15 high-ranking Nazi officers, largely educated bureaucrats, were present. The conference focused strictly on improving efficiency and administrative protocols, including better utilizing forced labor. While these killings were already underway, the meeting allowed for direct communication and problem-solving regarding their implementation. The Nazis were extremely meticulous regarding record-keeping. The ideology of Nazism, framed in a way around scientific rationale, was documented extensively in historical and radical records. Detailed record-keeping enabled government agencies to coordinate operations within the complex and often confusing network of overlapping bureaucracies under Hitler. Maintaining these records gave the Nazis a sense of control and authority, while also proving a bureaucratic justification for their actions. These records also enforced efficiency within Nazi ranks. Although some documents were burned or destroyed during the final months of World War II, extensive evidence survived, leaving the Allies shocked by the sheer volume of documentation maintained by the Nazi government. The Nazi Party was originally founded as the German Workers' Party, or DAP, in 1919. Anton Drexler played an instrumental role in its creation, credited as a co-founder. The party emerged in Munich, where Drexler, a locksmith by trade, sought a political organization to combat Marxism and promote German nationalism. Drexler invited Adolf Hitler to join the DAP in late 1919. While Drexler was the party's de facto leader, he lacked charisma and organizational skill. In 1920, largely due to Hitler's influence, the party transformed into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, abbreviated NSDAP, adopting the famous National Socialist slogan. Hitler's exceptional communication skills quickly overshadowed Drexler. 1 year later, in 1921, Drexler was removed from his leadership role, settling for an honorary position after opposing Hitler's centralized authority. He never regained influence and died in 1942 during the final years of the Third Reich. The Berlin Sportpalast was a critical event center that hosted several important speeches by Adolf Hitler during his rise to power in the early 1930s. Opened in 1910, the indoor multi-purpose arena had a capacity of around 14,000 people. Its enclosed environment allowed Hitler to give speeches year-round while maintaining complete control over the audience and atmosphere. Speeches were held typically at night to minimize distractions and underscore the significance. Some of Hitler's first speeches after becoming Chancellor of Germany took place at the Sportpalast. The arena is also known as the site of Joseph Goebbels' famous Total War speech in 1943. Use of the arena declined during the 1940s due to World War II and was ultimately demolished in 1973. Hitler survived many assassination attempts as a political figure. However, his first near-death experience came at the young age of 11 years old. The incident happened at the Inn River in Austria. The details are a bit foggy due to the time period and circumstances, but Hitler reportedly fell into the river, being pulled out by a friend, nearly drowning. There aren't many other details on this situation. However, it likely took place around the year 1900, considering Hitler's birth year of 1889. Hitler was nearly killed during combat, but was luckily spared by an enemy combatant. He survived the bad chemical gas attack, which blinded him towards the end of World War I, as well as numerous assassination attempts like Operation Valkyrie and other potential poisonings, being able to escape in some instances by sheer luck. The Nazi construction of the Deutsches Stadion in the mid-1930s called for an enormous 405,000 spectator capacity. Due to this gargantuan number, 5 sets of stands were to be constructed in a U-shape surrounding the stadium in Nuremberg. Because the Nazis had no visual example, they built 2 different test stands in a small town south of Nuremberg on a hill. The stands were constructed at different angles to compare spectator viewing ability in the upper areas. Albert Speer reportedly remarked, saying he was surprised, believing the view better than he had originally thought. Adolf Hitler himself visited the site in 1937, surveying the construction as the temporary stands were erected. It should be noted, the actual Deutsches Stadium itself never actually reached the building stage. The Nazis only dug out its foundation, which, due to construction being indefinitely suspended, ended up being filled with groundwater. Blondie, Adolf Hitler's dog later in life, is widely recognized, yet few are aware of an earlier canine encounter Hitler experienced as a young soldier during World War I. During that war, dogs were commonly employed not only for practical tasks but also for companionship. Hitler reportedly had a personal dog while serving with the Bavarian army as a message carrier. When he was reassigned, he lost contact with this dog, a loss that reportedly distressed him deeply. This early experience may have influenced his fondness for animals, as evidenced by the numerous animal rights laws enacted under his regime. Dogs in particular were cherished by soldiers, serving both as loyal companions and morale boosters during the hardships of war. Hitler also displayed an unusual preoccupation with mirrors and his own appearance, a fixation that reportedly began in his youth and persisted throughout his life. He would frequently check himself in mirrors, sometimes even during meetings, ensuring his image projected the exact impression he desired. In his private residences, mirrors were strategically placed at multiple angles across different rooms, allowing him to monitor his appearance throughout the day. This meticulous attention to personal presentation reflected a broader Nazi emphasis on precision, discipline, and aesthetic cohesion, traits that Hitler sought to embody personally and symbolically. The Nazis themselves were known to be extremely detail-oriented, which was overall reflected and exemplified within Hitler's own personal life.